everyone, and welcome to another episode of Disaster Empire Quick Views, where we spotlight thought leaders and innovative professionals in the resilience space. And I'm really glad to have here with me this time, we have Dave Greenberg, who is joining us. So really glad to get a chance to talk to you, Dave. And before we dive in today, can you share a little bit with the audience your background and how you got to be sitting here with me this time?
Sure. I grew up in New York City, and I don't sound like a New Yorker, but and I knew when I was 8 that I wanted to be a fireman when I grew up. And then at 13, I saved my first life. I was doing CPR on the street in New York City, total stranger. And so for me, I was hooked. But my parents wanted me to be successful. And for them, that meant I had to be a doctor or a lawyer. And that was about it, really. And but I ended up in this.
Most parents think that way, right?
Yeah, especially my parents. But anyway, I wrote about that in my book, so it's not like they don't know what I talk about them. But I went on dual career of being a volunteer firefighter and EMT. And then I went down to Texas, and we were just talking about off camera about you being with the Red Cross. I did some Red Cross stuff down in Dallas, where a lot of tornadoes and stuff and some of the relief stuff there. And then I got this amazing opportunity. I applied for and got accepted to the Dallas Fire Department. And at the same time, I got brought out to New Zealand for a interview for an IT job. And they offered me the job. And I had this dilemma of, do I go with the love, what I've always wanted to do, the firefighting, or do I go for the adventure? And I went for the adventure. That was in 1990. And I've been in New Zealand for 32 years, and I ended up much better than a firefighter for me. I ended up on a rescue helicopter. So I've been a rescue helicopter crewman for 25 years. And now, after that finished, I've got my own crisis incident management company in Wellington.
Excellent. Well, hey, I don't know if anything can top being, a rescue on a helicopter crew, but do you have a fun fact you want to share with the audience before we dive in?
My dad, he's since died. I did my post-grad diploma in emergency management, and my mom said, "Oh, your dad would have been so proud." And I couldn't help myself. And I said, "Yeah, because it's like those 4,000 life-saving missions don't mean much." And so the fun fact is that I never stopped picking on my mom. That would be the fun fact.
Well, hey, let's talk a little bit about that history. And, you have been what I'd call a man of action for your career. Like you said, you were right on the front lines as a first responder in New Zealand. Can you share what that experience was like for you and how you view the term resilience?
Sure. It's really interesting. It's post my career. I always knew I had resilience. And it's only as I've been doing my consulting the last few years that I figured it out. And I now look at resilience as kind of my ring of steel. And then within the ring of steel is prepare, respond, and recover. And what I realized in my whole career, that's the stuff I had to do in order to be resilient. So like preparing and train. On the helicopter, every 90 days, the winch, the steel cable on the side, pilot, crewman, paramedic, all of us had to do our part on the winch every 90 days. If we hadn't done a real job, then at $2,500 an hour, we went out and trained, because what you needed was the muscle memory. And yet you go into government departments or corporates, and if you could get a half-hour exercise on something once a year, and then they wonder why we're not ready when stuff happens. And one of the other things on the prepare side, my I made sure that I could go into the co-pilot seat. I wasn't a co-pilot. We didn't have controls, but I was up front with the pilot and blindfolded. I needed to be able to operate every radio and do everything I needed to do, because there were times when the concentration had to be outside of the machine, but we still had to be doing stuff on the inside. So if I could do it blindfolded, then I was prepared. So that whole kind of thing was just built into me. And so that was the part of the preparing. The other was sleeping and eating right and all that other stuff, because you go into a 12-hour shift that might be over in 12 hours, or you might be somewhere that isn't at home. We're at home base at 12 hours. And that's where things fall over, dehydration and hungry and stuff like that. And then when I go to the respond part for resilience, I have a model, a trust model I talk about. And the trust model is about trusting our training, trusting the resources, whether it be the helicopter, the equipment, or the other people. The U is trusting yourself. Like the day I stopped trusting myself would have been a good day to stop flying. The S is the systems, our systems and procedures. And then the T is the team. So those were the things. If I trusted all of that stuff on any given mission, then the resilience again was kind of built in. And then on the recover side, it's learning to leave it at the door. And this was one of the hard things. And I created a ritual that at the end of a shift, my helmet went in the locker. And when I closed the door, that was me closing the day on whatever I had seen. And I always never liked putting, you've seen terrible stuff. We saw some pretty terrible stuff. But it was always quite easy to put it into its little compartments. And that was really important because I didn't want to bring it home. I didn't want to lose sleep. And I didn't realize how well I had that sussed until after a helicopter crash that I wasn't part of, but I was helping manage it. We all had to go to a police psychologist just to check in and make sure we were okay. And her name was Sue. And she asked me how I felt about the helicopter crash. And I'm like, yeah, everyone's okay. We get a new helicopter. Life's cool. And then she's like, well, how do you deal with stuff? And I'm like, I just do. And she's like, no, that's not an answer. It's like some people drink, some do drugs, some beat their partners, but we all have a coping mechanism. And I just thought about it, and then I broke out laughing, and she's like, what? And I realized that chick flicks were always my way of letting go. I would go, and I would just cry like a baby, and it was really bad. Here you go on a first date, and you're this rescue crewman and a rescue hero, and I'd have to warn people, but if I'm crying hysterically during the movie, don't worry. And but that was the way I let go of all the emotion of what I had seeing. And my other coping mechanism was just my friends. Like my friends have no idea, even though I've told them over the years, like they always thought I was going to bum a free meal. And the free meals were nice. I was going to have a nice conversation with people I loved and get hugs from the little kids. And yeah, and when I had a dog, the dog was a great way. So for me, those are all the components of resilience. And when you have a chink in the resilience armor, that's when life or the job could really start getting to me or to you.
Thank you for all of that, Dave. Some very powerful stuff there. I like the idea of the ring of steel. Definitely being resilient, building that resilience with all of the good things, right? Sleep and proper exercise and nutrition. But then when you have experienced those traumas, as you were saying, making sure that you try to find some healthy coping mechanisms. chick flicks, aside, which is absolutely fine. I'll join you anytime. It's finding that right safe place, right, that you can really release those emotions. And I'm really glad to hear you talk about that. And definitely want to say thank you for everything that you did. Because I have, Coast Guard helicopter going over every day and, have some sense of what they're doing and where they're going. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And can I just say, I am not like the movie, The Guardian, those rescue swimmers. What the U.S. Coast Guard program is like, it would have killed me. So we did some pretty amazing stuff. But the U.S. Coast Guard is really one of the examples of they just bring it to the next level. So it's really cool to be part of that fraternity. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. It sounds it. No, it's great to provide that clarification. Hey, you and I met back in 2018 at the International Crisis Management Conference. And really was glad to meet you and wanted to hear a little bit with what you're doing now. You've worked on the first responder emergency management side. And how are you bringing that message into the corporate world? As you alluded to earlier, it is a different animal.
It is. I probably spend more time in government than I do in corporate, which just by how it's happened. But government departments, I just 2 weeks ago ran our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the State Department. They help all the Pacific Islands, Fiji, Samoa, and all of those, if they're in cyclone season with response. They're really big on training and exercising pre-cyclone season, which just started November 1st. So I work with the government departments on that. At ICMC, I'd been talking about, I've run 22 all of government exercises, a cruise ship that gets in trouble near the shore. And it wasn't so much the search and rescue, because we know search and rescue works. But it's like, how does New Zealand Inc. or any government handle 3,000 or 5,000 people coming ashore? And in context, New Zealand doesn't have the resources of most big cities. In our cities, we've got good resources, but we're quite a big country. If you put the map of New Zealand, it goes all the way from New York down to Florida, a thin wedge of it. And we've only got about 15 or 16 major tertiary hospitals in the whole country, because it's only a population of 5 million. So we've got different challenges. And that's why rescue helicopters get used so much, because of distance and topography. But it's bringing the messages. And a lot of what I do now is the keynoting on things like that trust model, because the more the corporates and the government departments realize that they've got to be prepared. And it's not just the big earthquake, which is one of the big risks in Wellington, but it's, what if your CEO gets hit by a bus? What are you going to do with it? The cyber attacks, knock on wood, at the moment, we don't have to worry as much about the shootings, but we've certainly had our problems with that. No one likes to think about it. No one wants to think about when things go wrong. So it's people like us who have to convince them that they've got to look at it. And the money and the time they don't spend now is really going to cost them in the long run.
Always a powerful message, and sometimes hard for them to hear in that way. Can you talk about your CIMS model, and if you could also add to that what you think are any differences between, so the U.S. emergency management model and what you've seen in New Zealand?
Yeah, well, our system and the Australian system are all based on the ICS system. So back in the 70s, Australian and New Zealand firefighters were going to the West Coast to help with the fires, like as they still do. And the Australians in the 80s said, hey, we need something like this. So they took it and applied it. And then the Kiwis in the early 90s created coordinated incident management system. The titles are a little bit different and some of the functions sit a little bit differently. But essentially, someone who knows NIMS will look at ours and go, oh, yeah, because incident management, command and control, they're all solid principles. And then it's just how we're applying. One of the interesting things in New Zealand at the moment, the CIMS goes pretty much not much on the incident level. It goes to the coordination center levels. And the FENS, Fire Emergency New Zealand, is now using CIMS when they're dealing with other agencies, but they're using the Australian system on the incident scene because that is so much more operational. And it's really amazing how similar they are, though. I did some firefighting. I was winching firefighters in the big fires at the end of 2019 in Australia. And I sat and looked at their system and I'm like, this is what we've got. It's incident management is pretty much incident management.
Yeah, it does work really well in the field for events in that way. So definitely a huge proponent of that. And, I've talked about for the corporate side for crisis management, ICS, typically in most organizations, with I think hospitals being an exclusion, don't work so well because you're bypassing the everyday chain of command. And so I think what I've done is really talked about a hybrid of that, using the good elements, right? But making sure that you're more mirroring the everyday way that things would work, obviously with coordination from whoever your emergency management or crisis management is in the organization. So thank you for providing, that overview of the similarities and a bit of the differences there, because it's, I think, really good for people to know across the globe. So I reached out to you, Dave, recently because I actually saw a post on LinkedIn that you wrote about your book. So I wanted to ask, and just was generally curious and very interested and hoping you could share with this audience, how did your book come about? And then what's going on with your book now? Because it seems like there were some challenges you had with the publisher. And I thought it would be good for anyone who would be, interested in maybe writing their own book down the line to have a little bit of a window into what you might recommend.
Thank you. So the book is called Emergency Response, Life, Death, and Helicopters. And Penguin Random House was my publisher, and they were fantastic. But like any book, it has its cycle. And it's not in the bookshops anymore. It's really just online. And so I approached them and asked them about getting the rights to the book back. And what I've done is I now have the rights back, and I bought my print files. I've learned so much about the difference between a publishing company versus self-publishing. So Penguin has all these hundreds of fonts that they could use. And you never even realize why a published book like that looks so good. Well, it was 17 fonts they used in the book, and it was going to cost me a couple of $1,000 US a year to just get the rights to it. So I'm busy getting someone changing the fonts and doing all of that. And then what I'm going to do, and I'll make the same offer just for your listeners. So I'm going to make the book free when I get it back online in the next couple of weeks. But then about every 90 days, I'm going to make it free. My value in the book these days isn't in selling it. No one ever gets rich writing and selling books. For me, it's about the message and talking about some of the, and it's a bit of an ego thing. I mean, it's pretty cool that it sold 5,000 copies and another 2,000 ebooks, but there's some good messages that I'm quite proud of. Anyone thinking the way it came about, I'm a good storyteller. And in New Zealand, people love the rescue helicopters. And everyone kept saying, oh, you should write a book. You should write a book. All the people who had written books told me, write a chapter list and then fill in the chapters I knew much better than them. So I wrote my rescue stories. And then I spent months of going back and writing my chapters and fitting my rescue stories. So, like, there's so much good advice about book writing. And it turns out most of it's pretty right. But you're an author for love of what you're doing, unless you write, Stephen King novel, or I don't think a lot of people make a lot of money off of books. But for me, it's now a marketing tool. And I go have a meeting with a corporate or government department, and then I'll send them a copy of the book and just say, hey, if you want to know more about me. The nice thing about a book is no one throws them out. It's not like a business card or a glossy brochure.
Yeah.
So it becomes this thing that sits in their office, and it
like a calling card. Yeah.
There's one department, they don't know they're doing it, but they call themselves the emergency response department. And so they love the title of my book, and it sits on the shelf with their manuals. Well, they're seeing my name every single day. So when they need some
that's great advertising, right?
And so that kind of stuff works. I do think I'm going to do, as I'm get more on the speaking circuit, specific little books like that trust model, and just going into it, just takeaways that people could have at a conference. But this is a 285-page book. I don't have another one of those in me. So, but it will be online, and so many on LinkedIn and across social media. I've had about 400 people now say they want a copy, and a lot of people offering to buy the book.
Great.
And which is really generous. So, but I'm more than, that's right. You were one of them. But I'm more than happy to give it free. But if people want to pay for the book, for the $2.99 that they pay, I'll probably just donate all that money to charity, because it's not, that seems like the right thing to do, because all the stories in the book are my take on other people's stories. People are generous and let me talk about the bad stuff that happened to them from my perspective. And so, people are very generous like that.
Yeah. Well, I think for those of us who do write, right? Because I'm writing a blog on a weekly, it's, you get an appreciation of how challenging it can be. And writing a whole book, as you've said, is a different endeavor. So just wanted to support you for that. So, but really generous of you to offer it to, the audience as well, as an opportunity to learn more about you and the stories, as you said, of the people that you've worked with.
So just so we don't forget, so Rescue Dave, RESCUEDAVE.com.
Perfect.
And on there, I'll, when this goes live, I'll put a link to it, to the show note. And if your listeners go there, they'll find a link where they can download it for free.
Perfect. We'll make sure to get that into the comment section. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Hey, as we were chatting right before we jumped on about, COVID and how, in a way, people have somewhat lost time, even though it's been great that now we're able to do and really to utilize mediums like this that we weren't doing as much before. But what would you suggest to emergency and crisis managers? Like, what are your lessons learned over the last few years, and what should they be thinking about and incorporating in the years ahead?
Great question. I was lucky enough, my business kind of went on hold, and I spent 2 years at the Ministry of Health, which is, so I was working with the equivalent of Anthony Fauci, the New Zealand version, a brilliant man, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. But one of the things was all of these Zoom meetings, like incident management used to have to be, we'd be in the same room. And even in Wellington, people would have to get together for a meeting. And now when we need to have a meeting, it saves an hour of walking around the city if everyone just jumps on a Zoom. There is so much benefit in being in the same room, some of the side conferences and stuff and the side chats, but we have to adapt. I mean, the doctors and scientists I was talking to don't think it's going to be another 100 years before the next pandemic. It's we need to adjust. And 5 years ago, doing remote incident management teams wasn't a thing. It was okay that you had your incident team remote, but having your national coordination center split across the country just wasn't a happening thing. And now we can do that. And it's a beautiful thing, because if you're sitting in Boston and for a big company that has a lot of offices and the Boston office goes down, you only need a phone connection into someone else who could set up the IMT. It really, technology is caught up, or we've caught up with the technology, and certainly the technology improved quickly. Teams and Zoom and Riverside, it's all just so much easier and better.
Well, hey, I would love to continue the conversation, but I know I need to wrap. But I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you want to share with the audience that you haven't gotten a chance to talk about tonight?
Yeah, the only one of my good things, or things I do well, because of the background of stories I've got, I say to typically emergency managers sit in that tier 3 or 4 management. And the ones who need to commit the money are the tier 1s and 2s. And I've said to a few of them, you get me in front of your tiers 1 and 2, and I'll convince them that they need to spend the money. And a lot of them are like, well, we can't even get meetings with our tier 1s and 2s because they're so busy doing other stuff. Find yourselves someone. I think there's always going to be someone on your tier 2 structure, or maybe it is your CE or whoever, and have a chat with them and just get them convinced. And it can be done. You just use stories. Storytelling is such a good way to get things done. But don't go to COVID. Don't go to Superstorm Sandy. Just go to what happens if we had a cyber attack and the building went out. Just real things, and find a way to get them engaged without going for the money right then. And I think once we engage the seniors, and when the incidents happen, get them engaged in governance, not in operational stuff, then I think we're all going to be a lot better off. But if I knew the silver bullet to do that, I'd be a rich man. But I know it's a frustration we all share in this space. But I have seen good examples of people overcoming the barrier. And sometimes it's because of something that does go wrong. But find someone in a similar business that had something go wrong and say, what if that was us? We used to, I'll finish on this. In the helicopter base, we used to sit around every day doing what if planning. What if, so Wellington sits south of the south coast of the North Island. Our airport where we were located, Cook Strait, ferries going by. And we would say, well, what if the A320 landing today hit the ferry? And then base it on that day's weather, or base it on it's a northerly, and people thought we were nuts, but it was just keeping us fresh. The what ifs over lunch, over coffee. It doesn't have to be huge exercises every time to keep people thinking and doing. And that's enough from me.
That's a great idea. And it's kind of like those micro simulation ideas that you're seeing people come out with. It's the same type of thing, just talking through. And I loved your idea about, thinking through what happens if your CEO, right, gets hit by a bus, right? If something that bad thing happens, that's something that's going to resonate with them. And I was also reading recently about boards really starting to need to act more like crisis managers as well. So that could be something else to explore. But hey, you gave people Rescue Dave as a place to connect with you. Are there any other ways that they can get a hold of you if they want to really network or if they want to work with you?
Yep. So LinkedIn, I'm out there. Dave Greenberg, the only one in a helicopter suit that I know of. And the only one in New York, I was one of several pages of D. Greenberg's. I'm the only D. Greenberg in New Zealand, so I'm pretty easy to find.
That makes it easy.
It does, but LinkedIn is probably the easiest way, or just drop me an email, rescuedave@gmail.com. But if anyone wants to find me, they will. And always love chats like this. It's funny when people talk about me being a thought leader. It's taken me a long time to accept that, but I'm working with people who are a lot smarter than me, and I just take their ideas and then come and talk about them. So it's all good.
Dave, thank you. And hey, I think you have great ideas and great stories to share. So I really appreciate you spending the time, and to our audience as well. I want to thank you, and please like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you this great content, and hopefully we'll chat again soon. Take care.
Cool. Thank you.